It was July 13th, 2013. My name is Rebecca Coriam, and back then I was 24 years old, working as a crew member on one of Disney's cruise ships, sailing between Mexico and California. It was my dream job. Living at sea, traveling the world, meeting people, everything seemed perfect. But that night something changed. The evening of July 12th, I was caught on the staff room's surveillance cameras. I was on the phone. My face was tense, my voice quiet but firm. I was having a conversation with someone who made me nervous. The audio of that call was never released. When I hung up, I took a deep breath, fixed my hair, and left the room. That was the last time anyone saw me. The next morning, I didn't show up for work. My cabin remained empty. At first, my colleagues thought I had overslept, but as the hours passed, worry grew. Soon after, I was officially declared missing. The ship was searched thoroughly, decks, cabins, engine rooms, every corner, but I was gone. The official explanation was simple and tragic. I had fallen overboard. A terrible accident, they said. But too many things didn't make sense. The deck where they claimed I fell wasn't easy to reach. It had high railings, cameras, and was usually deserted at that hour. No screams were heard, no commotion, no evidence. One of my colleagues whispered a theory that I had been investigating a harassment incident on board, that I had discovered something I shouldn't have. And that phone call, it might have been about that. My parents were flown to the ship a few days later. When they entered my cabin, they noticed something odd. A pair of men's shoes under my bed. Shoes they had never seen before. No one ever explained who they belonged to. Even stranger, my personal diary, where I wrote everything, was missing. The Bahamian authorities closed the case quickly. No evidence, no suspects, no body. But my family kept receiving anonymous emails in the months that followed. One of them read, "Rebecca is still on the ship." One tourist even claimed to have woken up during the night, feeling watched. She opened her eyes and saw a young woman standing next to her bed. A woman who looked like me. But then she vanished. Some say I never really left those hallways, that my soul still walks through the silent corridors, searching for answers that were never given. July 5th, 2004. My name is George Smith. My wife Jennifer and I were on our honeymoon, cruising the Mediterranean aboard Royal Caribbean's Brilliance of the Seas. It was supposed to be one of the happiest times of our lives. That night, we spent hours at the ship's casino, drinks, laughter, conversations with other passengers. Everything felt light and carefree. But as the hours passed, something shifted. The mood changed. Around 4 a.m., several guests reported hearing a loud thud, something heavy hitting the water. But no one raised the alarm. No one checked. The next morning, a housekeeper made a horrifying discovery. A large pool of blood on the canopy right below our cabin's balcony. The cabin itself was empty. I was gone. Jennifer was found a few hours later, disoriented, confused. The investigation began. The blood suggested I had either fallen or been pushed overboard. But there were no witnesses. No one had seen anything, and no body was ever recovered. Authorities were quick to suggest alcohol played a role. An unfortunate accident, they called it. But my family wasn't convinced. They found out that shortly before my disappearance, I had been in our cabin with 4 other men, people we had met on the cruise. Security cameras showed them leaving together, laughing. Yet none of them were ever charged. One crew member confessed that the scene was cleaned hastily before the authorities arrived. Evidence was lost. Later, one of the women from that group wrote chillingly, "What happened on that ship was a mistake." After that night, Strange things started to happen in our old cabin. Lights turning on by themselves. The telephone ringing with no one on the other end. Only the distant sound of water. And sometimes, in the mirrors, crew members claimed to see a reflection that didn't belong. A man, wearing a white shirt, standing silently. Some believe I never left, that I remained trapped in that night, in that room, still seeking justice. And on certain nights, when the ship is quiet and the waves are calm, they say you can feel my presence, watching, waiting. In 2006, Mary and her husband, Alan, had decided to take a well-deserved break. They were both teachers, stressed from work and routine, so they booked a one-week cruise in the Caribbean on one of the most modern and luxurious ships of the time. It was their first cruise ever. As they boarded, they were enchanted. Sparkling pools, endless buffets, live music. It really seemed like a small, floating city suspended on water. Their cabin was on deck 7, number 7037, an interior room with no windows, but spacious, modern, and at first glance, perfectly in order. But from the very first minute, something was wrong. Mary was the first to notice. As soon as she stepped into the cabin, she smelled a strange, pungent odor. It wasn't rotten or moldy. It was something sweet, but at the same time, disgusting, like spoiled meat covered in perfume, a contrast that gave her chills. She immediately reported it to the reception. They answered politely, but vaguely. It's probably just a temporary issue with the ventilation system. We'll take care of it as soon as possible. But no one took care of it. Night fell, and Mary, tired, went to sleep. But something woke her up around 3 a.m. Not a sound, but a feeling. She felt like she was being watched. She slowly opened her eyes and in the darkness saw a blurry figure standing at the foot of the bed. She couldn't make out the face. It looked like a motionless silhouette. When she turned on the light, the figure was gone. She thought it was just a dream, or perhaps one of those strange illusions one has upon waking. The next day, however, she noticed something else. On the ceiling above the bed, there were dark stains. They looked damp. She reached up and touched them with a tissue. The fabric was stained with a dark, brown, sticky liquid. She thought it was rust, but there was that same sweet, sickening odor again. She decided to return to reception and insist on changing cabins. But they replied that the ship was full. There were no alternatives. That night, Mary couldn't sleep. At 2:47 a.m., she clearly heard a knock coming from the wall, then another, 3 in total, as if someone was knocking from inside the wall. She put her ear to the wall, and what she heard froze her blood. A weak, scratchy, but very clear voice said, "Go back." She jumped up and woke her husband, who hadn't heard anything. He tried to reassure her, saying it was just suggestion, stress, lack of sleep. But Mary wasn't crazy. She knew what she had heard. The next day, in full panic, she threatened to disembark at the first stop. At that point, the staff finally sent a technician to check the ventilation system and the service compartment behind the wall. What they found was shocking. Behind the wall, in a small space accessible only to staff, was the decomposing body of a man. He was curled up among the pipes, as if he had hidden there or been placed there. No one knew how long he had been there, but soon the answer came. The man was identified as a passenger who had disappeared from the same ship 3 weeks earlier. He had left his cabin during the night and was never found again. In the meantime, the ship had completed other voyages. No one had noticed anything. No one except Mary, who had sensed his smell, his whispers, his presence. Cabin 7037 was closed to the public immediately after the incident. It was never rented to passengers again, but some crew members still say that when they pass in front of that door, they feel a strange sensation of cold. And if you stay silent, you can hear whispers coming from inside. And who knows, maybe that man never really left.